this from your personal page or from your church page? Okay. Dude, it's all
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make.
It's all good.
Are you from Ohio? What part of Ohio?
Columbus, just north of Columbus. I'm not a Buckeye fan, if that's what you're getting at.
Oh, okay. We can keep it.
Actually, so I'm naturally a contrarian, and so I rooted for Michigan growing up. Just I couldn't stand the Buckeye madness, and so just to be a pain in everybody's butt, I rooted for Michigan. That pretty much died off when it didn't aggravate everybody anymore, which is when I realized that's all it was to begin with. But like, it caused family drama. Oh, good stuff.
Just so you know, we are not Jews.
That's all right. But I'm not usually quite that upfront about it. I want to share this to my church's page, but I'm not quite sure how to do it.
I lived in SEC country for 10 years, so it was interesting when it comes to college football, or college sports in general.
Yeah. I'm just sharing it directly from my church, from the church's page. So Michael, where did you grow up in Michigan, I assume?
Yeah, I lived like half my life in Michigan, half my life in Georgia, and then I moved back, so it's a little bit more than half my life now here in Michigan. But I lived in inner city Detroit for some time, 2 years in Virginia, and then a decade in Georgia, kind of metro Atlanta, and then 4 years in the sticks, in the mountains.
All right. Had you on wait. So it looks like from your Facebook, you're a basketball fan.
I mean, not as much as the other guys, but I walked on our college team. I had no reason to be on that basketball team. I walked on. I played 2 years, JV and coach. My basketball highlight is we had this guy that me and him didn't rock too well together. And he, in a game of pickup, open jump, he tried to windmill dunk on me, and I blocked it.
Hey, there you go.
So that's my highlight of my entire basketball career, practice game.
Hey, that's better than mine. I'm a basketball guy too, but I'm 5'7", so that didn't work out so well. I can still shoot, but I can't really move anymore, so.
Yeah, well, one of us is still like 6'7", 6'9".
Right. The building we rent has a full-size gym, so that's like my escape if I'm doing sermon prep or something and I'm just stuck. I'm like, I'm gonna go shoot some free throws.
All right, everybody. I am excited to be on today. My name is Ken. Obviously, it's on my own page, but I brought some friends with me today to have a candid conversation, and we're titling this Race, Religion, and Relationships because we believe it's all three that are necessary in order to come together. And so I want to introduce, these are friends, people I actually know, and we just wanted to have a conversation about, obviously, the climate, what's going on right now, as you're aware of. What has happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others of injustice. But we're going to be talking about also how we feel, but steps moving forward. I think that's important too, because a lot of times we just stop with how we feel. But what are some solutions, if there are ones, for healing to take place? So I'm excited. First, I want to introduce Andrew, good friend of mine. We started the church the same Sunday, and we've been grinding ever since. So, Andrew, I want to appreciate you just coming on, short notice, and just introduce yourself. Where are you at? First of all, we're going to give you a round of applause here. All right. And, yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, man, thanks. It's really good to do this. I'm thankful that you invited me into it. And yeah, so I'm Andrew Schultz. I pastor City North Church in Sunbury, Ohio, which is on the northeast, the extreme northeast side of Columbus. Grew up here, hated it here, left here. God called me back here to plant a church. And yeah, so like Pastor Ken said, we launched the same day, September 18th in 2016, and been grinding since. And I love it. I also build websites on the side because, you know, God called me to be a pastor. So you got to make some money somewhere.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
But I, you know, this is all kind of new for me. I called Pastor Ken yesterday, and I know he's going to talk a little bit about that, but just wanted to see, like, as a very white guy in a very white city.
You're white? Oh, okay.
How, yeah.
I thought it was the lighting
how
or
I could,
something.
like,
Okay.
Yeah, how I could be part of helping. And so I'm just, man, I'm honored that you would invite me into this, and just met Michael. So I'm excited to get to know you a bit better and learn a bit of your story and kind of, yeah, just start a conversation.
Okay, great. And then Michael, we live around the same area. I've known Michael for a few years now. I just love his heart. He's very passionate, and I love it. And he's just a person who's like, okay, someone that I've been watching in terms of specifically about these issues, where he's like putting steps together and saying, let's get mobilized. And so I wanted to bring him on because I think he's a voice that we need to listen to specifically during this season. So I'm going to give him a round of applause just the same. And so, Mike, go ahead, man, introduce yourself, and then we'll get started in this interview.
Michael Howard, husband, wife of husband, wife, obviously, if I'm a husband, and then two beautiful kids. We moved back to the Metro Detroit area because it's just our heart to reach the city. Grew up here and went back when I would consider it was more thriving. And it's just the heartbreak to see the city and some of the state it was in. So we moved back to make a difference, to make a change. I have the privilege to serve at a church in the city of Warren, so right across the border from Detroit. And yeah.
Great, man. Your wife is already shouting you out, man. She's already saying, hey, boo, so glad you're doing this. It's like, man, you got a fan club of one. So that's awesome, man. Well, listen.
She also texted me and told me I wasn't all the way in the frame.
Okay, yeah, you got to move over a little bit. You look good right now. Well, listen, let's jump into it. I want to honor your time. I mean, there's so many directions that we can go into. And so yesterday I received a call from Andrew. And when I got off that call, I was so encouraged, right? And I just said, I wish people could hear the dialogue that we had. It was nothing but respect, but we also had honest conversations as well. And I was appreciative that he reached out to me. So, Andrew, I just want to start with you for a moment. You gave me a call yesterday. I think it was about a 2-hour conversation. It just flew by. But we had open and honest conversations, and I appreciated that. Just what were you thinking? You reached out yesterday, obviously, with what's going on, and so your heart was heavy. And let's just talk about that for a few moments.
Yeah, man. So you know, I tend to stay out of the fray a lot, especially on social media. You know, like if there's kind of polarizing things happening in any capacity, racial or political, whatever, I tend to try to stay out of that stuff. And mostly that's because I feel like I have a call to be a bridge builder. And in general, polarizing topics don't tend to build bridges, especially on social media. And so I tend to just stay out of that stuff. And it's always I think with the best of intentions. But just, man, as this week progressed and as I read more about the George Floyd situation and I began to see more and more responses from friends and people that I really respected and even just people that, I'm just acquaintances with on Facebook, I felt like God was just really saying, like, man, you got to speak up. You got to do something here. But that presents a problem for me because I grew up in a town and I live in a town that is, I don't know, it's like 99.7. I think like 5 kids that were black in my graduating class from high school. I went to a college that's further north and more rural than here. And so, I think between high school and college, I had certainly less than 25 people in my graduating classes that were black. So, I mean, like, I know I don't know anything about the experience of being black in America. And what I do, because I want to be a bridge builder, what I don't want to do is speak out of turn. I don't want to say ignorant, stupid things. But like I'm realizing more and more how ignorant I am about a lot of this, and I don't like that. And so, Ken, we've obviously built a relationship over the last few years, and I respect you tremendously. And I knew that I could call you and have an honest conversation and ask questions and learn and gain some understanding before stepping out into a territory that, frankly, is very foreign to me. Mm-hmm. I want to be an agent of change and reconciliation and peace, but I don't know how to do that because I don't understand your context much at all. Yeah. And so just being able to understand a bit better, being able to learn and to grow and to have, and I very much value honesty and authenticity. That's a marker of our church. And so being able to hear from you and learn from you and grow from you a bit and just say, man, where do we go from here? Because I don't have those answers at all. Yeah. Man, that's why I reached out, and I felt the same way about our conversations. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you reaching out, and just what you said at the end is you don't have all the answers. Well, I don't have all the answers. Mike, he has more answers than we do, but he doesn't have all the answers. And, for me, I was off social media. I was going to be off for 40 days. And so I was a little bit late to the party when it comes to these different cases. And so I was like, nope, I'm staying off social media. But then I realized that even my silence spoke loud. Mm-hmm. And I think my church needed to hear it. People needed to hear it. And so that's why I'm on. Now I'm going off again on Monday, but to have this conversation as well. So one of the things you asked me on that conversation is what could you do? And one of the things I said, the first thing is do what you're doing right now. You call and you just ask questions. And so I want to applaud you for that, man. I want to applaud you for your humility, your boldness, right now, even being on this call or whatever. So that speaks volumes. So I just want you to know, man, your heart's in the right place, and that conviction that you had to reach out and to be teachable in a sense. Not that I was like, well, listen to me, just having a conversation. I think if you ask me, what are some things that we can do? The first step I would say is to ask the question that you're asking. What can I do? That's step number one. And so many times, being an African-American, specifically a pastor, if I can be honest, a lot of times we don't get those questions. It might just be a post that's rushed, and then we don't have further dialogue. And just like you said, to be a bridge builder, it means that we must come together and have open, honest conversations. Because if there's going to be reconciliation, there's going to be confrontation. And confrontation is uncomfortable, but that's the gospel. Jesus, what does he do? He confronts us with our sin in order for us to be healed. So again, man, I was encouraged, just an honor that you would call me, and then the conversation that we had was gold. And so one of the things too that I thought was great, and I asked could we share this story, because I think the first 15 minutes and 20 minutes we were having a great conversation. Then I think some light bulbs went off on both of us when you shared the story of you actually coming to Detroit. Actually, this is the connection right here, because Michael, he spent a lot of time in Warren, and then you shared the story about Warren. So could you kind of talk about that, and then we'll get Michael coming in, because this will be funny, Michael. You would like this story.
Yeah, man. So the context for this, the thing that kind of triggered this in my mind, Ken, was you were talking a little bit about some situations throughout your life that you've been uncomfortable in, and you were kind of trying to relay to me how, I think you were just trying to get me to understand, like, there's just a lot of discomfort in general. Like, I don't feel like I fit in a lot of places that people take for granted. Yeah. And I was kind of trying to relate that to my life, and I was like, man, I haven't really felt that way ever. And then I had this moment, I was like, no, I have though. I remember. So I interviewed at a church in Warren, Michigan. It would have been in late 2014, probably. So I'm from rural Ohio. I mean, I already talked about how, I haven't known a lot of black people through my life. My wife grew up in rural West Virginia. She's very similar background. Like, that's just been our lives, right? So we go to Detroit, to Warren to interview at this church, go through the weekend. We get through the Sunday morning service. We start driving home. And as we're driving home, we lived in northern Kentucky at the time. So as we're driving home, we're just getting ready to leave Detroit. And we were like, man, we got to go to the bathroom. We got to find some place to stop and go to the bathroom. Like, we don't know what's after Detroit, but probably not much. So we need to stop somewhere. Like, the next place we see, we're stopping because there might not be another place. So we're coming down 75. We see a McDonald's. Like,
75 and Mac. 75 and Mac. That McDonald's.
Yeah. So I
already knew.
So we get off the exit. We pull into the McDonald's parking lot. There's bars on the windows. And we're like, well, that's different. So we get out of our car. We go inside. We're in our church clothes. And Vanessa goes to go to the bathroom, and she goes to push the door open, and it's locked. And she looks at me, and she's like, the door's locked. Why is the door locked? I have no idea. She's like, well, I guess what do I do? Like, I don't know. I guess go talk to somebody at the front. So we go to the front, and the counters are so high. I'm like, why are they, like, I can't even see the people over the counters. Why are the counters so high? And Vanessa says to the lady, hey, the bathroom door's locked. And she's like, well, yeah, we have to buzz you in. And Vanessa looks at me like, what world are we in right now? We had never seen counters that high at a McDonald's. We had never seen bars on a McDonald's. We had never had to get buzzed into the McDonald's bathroom. Like, and so as Ken's talking about just situations that he's in, that's like, I don't feel like this is not normal for me. I don't understand this. I was like, oh yeah, that McDonald's in Michigan. It was, I mean, really, like, we came out of that going, what in the world just happened? Like, we don't understand at all. And, like, Ken, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you had relayed several things to me up to that point that were maybe not quite that extreme. Yeah. But just sort of that sense of, like, this isn't my world. Mm-hmm. And how normal that is for you to feel that way, where for me, I've had very few experiences in my entire life where I felt that way. And I think that was kind of the light bulb moment for me of like, oh my goodness, that's how you feel all the time? Like, that's crazy. Yeah. But I think it's healthy for me to understand that, and hopefully people find that story funny and not offensive. But like, really for me, that was a light bulb moment. Like, oh my goodness, all that discomfort of just going, what are all these things that seem so foreign to me in a context that should seem fairly normal, like a McDonald's. Yeah. And that was significant.
So at that moment, going into that McDonald's, you felt like an outsider. Like, I don't belong here. And so what I mentioned is, we've been in rooms before, the same rooms, and I said, man, honestly, that's how I feel. At times, I feel like an outsider, and we know this. Miles McPherson has a great book called Third Option. Also, Brian Laritz, where they talk about social identity theory, where that whole concept is, I feel like an outsider. I can take my identity away and assimilate to everybody else, or I can go somewhere else. And so that's kind of the conversation that we had, just in terms of, we built commonality the same way that you feel. When you were uncomfortable at something being a McDonald's, just like if I walk into a church, whether it's an all-black church, it's like, man, I can feel at home. But at the same time, if I go somewhere else, although it's McDonald's or a church, I might not know all the cues. Like, even when you said, you went up to the bathroom, or your wife did, I already knew. I finished the story. It's like, Andrew, what are you doing, man? Get the key. You don't know that? It's like, nope. And so, I mean, that's very important. And then, two, I didn't mention this yesterday, but there's a conference that I go to. It's a preaching conference, the E.K. Bailey Conference. And it's great. It helps you with preaching. They just take a book of the Bible, spend 4 days going through it. But honestly, one of the reasons I go there, because for me, it's about 500 black pastors, and I don't have to worry about those things. I feel free. Yeah. That's a space where I'm comforted, and that's one of the main reasons I go. And so I want to bring Michael into this conversation, because you kind of heard the dialogue, and we spent a couple hours going from there. But I really love your heart right now, and I've been following you Obviously since we've been friends, but right now, just where is your heart at right now? And then I'll come back to you, Andrew, just where your heart is.
Sure.
So, and I know with you, it's not just a hashtag moment. It's not just because of George Floyd, what's going on with the riots. I mean, you've been speaking out even when certain things aren't, let's say, quote unquote, popular right now. You keep the thread going. And so where does that come from? Where's your heart at? Just kind of share for a few moments.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up in very, very urban, almost unanimous Black Detroit urban city. My first like racial encounter, I would say, where it was like, I don't belong here, happened. I think I was in third grade, riding in the bus. I was sitting next to this white girl, thought she was cute, talking to her, and people were like, "You can't sit next to her." I'm like, "Why not?" And like that was an awakening moment for me. Like, you're not in Detroit anymore. Then living 10 years in Georgia, and where I was in most rooms, the only Black person, period, in 100 plus people, if not like at my school where there was probably 3% of our school was African American, and so like knowing some of the things that I've gone through personally and other stories, there's this just like constant frustration, constant anger that I feel like you have to fight this tension of like, I'm going through this experience and no one's listening. And I feel like those that should be the ones listening are the ones that are actually listening the least amount. Or, I feel like some people have one hand over their ear, but those people that are called to listen are like this. And so, going to a Baptist college thinking like this is going to be a safe space. And when I was confronted with microaggressions and subtle racism on a constant basis, it was just, it was aggravating to say the least, and pretty infuriating, irating, for sure.
Yeah. So even right now, taking your experiences to what's going on in the church right now. And so Andrew asked the question to me in terms of, hey, man, what can I do? Like he wants to help, wants to get involved, but at the same time, it's like, I don't necessarily know. And which I think is a great approach to have. And so I just want you guys, I want to be the middleman, just have a candid conversation for a moment. So Mike, like you hear his heart, and we just spoke for a few moments. We got some commonalities. They both hate the Buckeyes, I think. And
for sure.
Yeah.
Don't say that. A lot of people here don't know that.
Okay. Oh, my fault. I'm sorry. People are going to leave the church now. And then number two, obviously just the Warren connection. But so Mike, here's someone that's not just Andrew, anyone coming and saying, hey, man, I want to be a part of what's going on. I don't want to just be someone who quotes and that's it. And that's kind of my qualms a little bit sometimes, because now it is like, in a sense, the cool thing to do.
Yeah.
Where the cost isn't there as much. Now it's like, okay, let's just jump on the bandwagon now. Okay. All right. It's like Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. He's on Golden State now. And everybody likes Golden State, But what would you say to that? Like, what are some practicalities? And there's people watching right now who want to know, and people ask me all the time that we can do. So yes, we posted, we made statements. That's great. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. I mean, I think step one is exactly what Pastor Andrew's doing is listening, identifying you don't know what you don't know, and that you need somebody to come alongside of you. So I really appreciate you making that step, to listen, and to ask the question. I think, a part of my frustration, I would say many people that are in your position, Andrew, are choosing not to listen. And so I can't applaud you more for that. And then trying to figure out, like, okay, you're asking this question, there's resources and stuff that you're going to have to dive in and to learn, because now you have to figure out, like, how do you engage this experience that you are so foreign with? And so you have to, there's a historical narrative from our country that I feel like you have to understand the history. That's where I think this conversation is so hard, because I think as an African American, not only do we live this experience, but we have to learn the history. Like, we have to learn about where we came from and the struggles and the progression that we had. Whereas, frankly, you don't have to learn our story. There's a reason why there's a Black History Month, because we have to dedicate something. And then even, where I lived at, we didn't celebrate, Black History Month. On Martin Luther King Day, it was Stonewall Jackson Day. And so you have to choose to learn. It's like, well, why that's not fair. Like, why do I have to learn? I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but many people do. It's like, that's a privilege where we don't have the option to. So really, like, we're asking you to come on board with us. And so I think committing to learn, to listen, to learn, and to lament, like this whole situation presently is heartbreaking. With George Taylor, I couldn't watch the video.
Me neither.
I couldn't. It was, and I know there's a lot of conversation around George Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. But right now I can list another 10 names in the past month. There's been cases here in Michigan, Oklahoma, Ohio, Georgia in the past 2 weeks. And so, there's just this heaviness that I'm just in right now, where I'm angry. I'm frustrated with our country. I'm frustrated with our leaders. I'm frustrated with Christians, down the list. And I think part of that is joining me in that. A lot of times when my daughter falls, I'm quick to grab her, and I want her to stop crying. I want her to fix the problem quick and move on to the next thing, rub some dirt in it. Let's keep on going. But with some things, you just have to sit in the heavy. You just have to sit in the sadness, the moment, with us. If someone that passed away, you wouldn't just be like, all right, they passed away, let's move on. Like, you have to sit in that moment, because we're grieving. We're grieving the reality that me and Ahmaud Arbery had mutual friends. I lived 25 minutes away from him. He's 2 years younger than me. That could have literally been me. And so I'm grieving that could have been me. That could have been my brother, my 16-year-old brother. And so I would say, listen, learn, lament, and then leverage. Leverage.
That's good.
The privilege you have, the leverage, the influence you have in the circles. And I know privilege is a hot topic word, but the most privileged man that's ever walked this earth was Jesus. And he used that privilege to influence where he lived, worked, and played.
Come on now.
So let us leverage our influence where we live. So even though, like you said, you're in rural Ohio and there's almost no minority there, how can you leverage your circle with your family, where you go to the gym at, to stand up, even though there might not be minorities around you? I still think leveraging your influence is widely important.
Yeah, man, I love that. You said listen, lament, and leverage. Yeah, that's powerful. I think sometimes, and this is what we've shared on the phone conversation, I said, number one thing is just before we jump to solutions, is just listen, hear what I'm feeling right now. And the Bible says that we can be angry, but do not sin. So you can have a righteous anger. Yeah. There was a time Jesus came in right to the temple and was to the tables, he was angry at that moment. So I think sometimes just saying, having these dialogues now and just getting it out, I think that's therapeutic for both sides as well. But at the same time too, I always use the analogy of Job's friends, right? First 7 days, his friends didn't say a word. Why? Because Job was grieving. Then right when they opened up their mouth, that's when it caused the problem, because he was still grieving, right? And so I think right now, a lot of people are not even in solution mode. We're grieving, we're lamenting. And, obviously something else is going to happen in the future. But I think to Michael's point, it's let's not just hop on the bandwagon or become social justice fighters just when it's convenient. Because I shared this with you. I had a friend during a message who called me on the phone, and this was when Ahmaud Arbery, died, and said, "Man, what should I say? What should I say?" I was like, "Well, you're in James chapter 2 talking about favoritism. This would be a great opportunity." And he preached it, and then he got some kickback from some of his church. And I said, "Kudos to you, because it's going to cost you something. How do you know that you're fighting against injustice? It will cost you something. And for all of us, it will cost us, members, as church leaders, I think members, finances. So for me, if you're really speaking out against injustice, this is all of us have to figure this out. It's going to cost us something. But at the end of the day, are we on the side of truth? Or are we on the side of just being complacent and in a sense just doing it, because the narrative is popular right now? So I think that's important, as well. So Michael, any more thoughts, man? I want you to lay that down again, man. Listen, lament, leverage. Kind of talk about that.
Listen, learn.
Okay.
So listen is the dialogue. Learn is like educating yourself. So there's a lot of books that I would point towards. Wide Awake is one. I love that book because it talks about the difficulty of having this conversation. The Black experience, the minority experience in America is always talked about. It's divergent from whiteness. So we have church, and then we have Black church. We have Americans, and then we have Asian Americans, African Americans. Whereas the Wide Awake kind of breaks down some of that, how the standard has become whiteness, and we need to those that us are white need to be able to think through, and is written by a white guy. Realize that everything we are looking through, we're looking through a cultural lens, just like me and Ken are. Like our cultural lens does affect certain things that we see, and so how do we take off our cultural lens and look through a biblical lens? So books like Wide Awake, Be the Bridge. I can't recommend Be the Bridge anymore. BeTheBridge.com is written by Latasha Morris. She leads it's a cohort that walks you through things like reparations, reconciliation, confession, forgiveness, repentance, huge topics that, like, we talk about racial reconciliation a lot, and sometimes racial unity is a word that's used outside the church, but reconciliation is a biblical word. And I think racial unity, racial reconciliation is great evidence of the gospel. And so when we talk about doing this work together, it can only happen within the confines of the church. And so in being a Christian, like, we were given the ministry of reconciliation. And so it's our job to actually do that. So listen, learn, get educated, read books, read, about the history of Martin Luther King, the Black Panther movement, all these things that are just education. And then lament. There's a biblical precedence for that. Whereas in American culture, we don't really talk about that. Really, the whole book of Psalms is one or two things. It's either praise, which our church is really great at, and then lamenting, which we don't really like to talk about those passages all too much, but we're quick to praise. And I think psychologically that makes sense, but we have to find that balance, and then leverage. I think one of the things Pastor Ken that's been on my mind recently is some of the riots that are going on. Whereas here in Detroit, we had a peaceful protest, and then later in the evening things got crazy, and it's all this anger. If you don't know how to express this anger, if you don't have a safe channel, we push a lot of young guys towards sports when they, take out your anger on the court, take out your anger on the field. When you don't have a channel for that, you're just going to combust. And so, not that I condone any of the riots that are going on, but we can't condemn them without giving a solution. And I think that solution has to come from the church, because I think racial reconciliation will only come through the church.
Yeah, no, that's a good word. So, Andrew, I want to throw it back to you for a moment. So, in light of all that he shared and kind of what's been going on, your conviction and how God's been stirring you up, I know it's a lot. And I just want to ask a direct question. Is it
Yeah.
overwhelming? Is it overwhelming?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean, you know, I've got three kids that are well, 6, 5, and 1.5, and I mean, it's barely like I can barely stay awake most days, you know. So it's like I'm thinking about like, okay, I want to be a part of this, man. I got to learn. Like, I like to learn stuff. I don't even know if my brain can put any more in it right now,
Mm.
you know. Um, and I'm certainly not saying that as an excuse. But that's over digging into that kind of stuff, and I think that that's probably, you know, because Ken, as I've been reflecting on our conversation yesterday, I've been sort of trying to identify the excuses that I've made along the way, and that I tend to hear from the white people that I know along the way, and I think one of the biggest ones. This doesn't usually come out overtly, but I think that for a lot of people, I think there's a tension of feeling like, man, like I might have biases. I've used that word several times today. I think the plural is biases. I don't know. Um,
That's right today.
I've like I know I have biases. I know that I have things that I don't see properly. I'm positive of that. But I've also spent my entire life working very, very hard to not be racist. So why do I need to work harder at it? You know, like, can't that be enough? I think that's one of the underlying tensions that tends to come out in the white response to black situations like this, right? Like, there's just this kind of underlying thing of like, why are we making a big deal about it? Most of us aren't racist. And while that is certainly true, well, as I say that, I know that's even a loaded thing. Um, I think what we do is we erroneously compare ourselves to the past, right? And it's like, we don't own slaves. So we're certainly not as racist as them. Like I shared with Ken yesterday, my great grandfather lived until I was 20, and he was a great man. He was awesome. He called black people darkies every time he referred to black people. Now that was the culture he grew up in. I didn't think anything of it. I knew it was tone deaf, and I knew it was kind of ridiculous. Like, I just chuckled about it and laughed it off. But I'm like, I'm not as racist as he was, you know. So I think there's this sense of like, I'm not as bad as it's been. I've genuinely tried throughout my life to not be racist, to not be prejudiced. So why do I need to work harder at it? Can't that be enough?
Yeah.
And it seems to me, and I want to say this as a statement, but a question. It seems to me like the tone deafness in that is that I'm going, well, I've had to work hard to not be racist, where you're going, I've had to work my whole life just to like get by. And those are not equal things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good word for sure, man. There's a lot there. Yeah, and I think the challenge for this conversation to go well is one, from your side, you have to figure out like, how do you sit in that, because
Yeah.
it's easy for you to like, okay, even now when this situation is over with, like, to go back to quote unquote normal, how do I sit in the reality that I'm in now? And for me, this is where the frustration, like, and some of the how and where I'm trying to still currently process myself now is, when a quick story, when my dad moved into Warren 24 years ago, he had 4 neighbors up and leave because a black man moved into the neighborhood. When we were in the process of buying the house that we're in now, 3 years ago, so 2017, we had the person that lives across the street from us, as we were like meeting, talking about buying it, come up and start ranting and yelling at my little sister how black people are ruining the neighborhood and this and that and that. So as much as like we are not where we used to be,
Yeah.
we're not as far as we thought we were. And so living in that where, one of the phrase, and it's well-meaning, and it is true, change is slow. We have to take it step by step by step. Those are well-meaning and those are true, but I want change now. And it's not that just because I want it, it's because we need it. Like, we need to see things starting to happen now, because it's, for some of us, is life and death. is not just about comfort. Is for us, it's about life or death. One of Martin Luther King said, I can't remember the phrase right now off the top of my head, but basically, slow progress is no progress. Slow change is no justice at all. And so, how do we balance the two of sitting in that and also demanding for change now, together? Because I need you just as much as you need me.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a follow-up to something you talked about in there for a moment. I think, again, as I've been reflecting on, I think what I see as maybe some of the breakdowns, first of all, people even being able to sit down and have actual dialogue with each other without going crazy. I mean, that's a huge one. So,
Yeah.
man, and Ken, that's why I called you yesterday. I knew you and I could do that.
Yeah.
And as we began to talk about further conversations and what that would look like, I mean, I said straight up to you, man, you invite whoever you want to invite, because I trust you. I trust that if you're going to invite somebody to this conversation, they're not going to be some crazy person. And so, I love what's happening here. I'm thankful for it. But I know that one of the other significant issues that happens is there is so much tone deafness. And I'm realizing more and more how tone deaf I am, because I so fundamentally don't understand much of anything that you guys experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that this really kind of first began to crystallize for me a couple years ago, I heard Pastor Miles McPherson give a talk at the ARC conference on race. And he talked about how damaging saying "I don't see color" is. And I remember hearing him saying that and going, "Oh my good!" I don't know if I've ever used that phrase, but I've certainly thought that way, and worn it as like a badge of honor. When in reality, all I'm actually doing is completely dehumanizing your experience. And so as I've kind of dug into that a bit more, and Ken, you said some things to me yesterday that were similar to that. Just things that was like, man, I never really thought about the way that actually impacts people. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that for you guys, as I think about how to leverage my influence, I think the biggest way I can do that personally right now is in helping my church learn how to leverage their relationships better and their influences better, right? Because our net collectively as a church is far wider than my net individually. And so I think a lot of that is maybe, at least as some initial steps, is learning how to not be so tone deaf, and learning how to stop saying stupid things that we're hanging ourselves on because we don't understand, and with with good intentions maybe, but things that just don't translate at all, and maybe even communicate the opposite of what we're trying to communicate, right? Like when I say I don't see color, I'm trying to say, well, we're on an even playing field. But in reality, I'm just saying, well, your past doesn't matter. Your experience doesn't matter. And that's garbage. I should be celebrating that. So what are maybe some of the tone deaf things that if you could say, like, hey, white Christians, stop saying these stupid things that you don't even understand what you're saying? What would some of those things be?
That I would say the way we talk about the gospel in relation to race problems versus other sin issues, because racism is essentially the sin of partiality, and so is the sin of favoritism. But when we talk about other issues like adultery, with those sin issues, we engage them with the gospel. If somebody was cheating on their wife, we would pull them to the side and we would address that sin issue, especially if they were a leader in one of our churches. We would confront that. We wouldn't go to their wife and say, just pray for them, just forgive them. But when issues of racism happen, it's pray for them, forgive them. Unfortunately, I had a conversation with another Christian talking about this, and his perspective, what he was going to teach on this topic was that we need to pray for the McMichaels. And I'm like, that's true. From a biblical perspective, that is true. But that's where he was stopping. Yeah. And so he was putting a wet blanket of the gospel over racism. But when it comes to other sin issues, we attack with the gospel. So I think just, you got to forgive them, you got to love, those kind of feel good phrases. Um, I would say are pretty tone deaf, because I think it forgets that the cross was bloody. And as much as we want to glorify the cross, and celebrate Easter, we can't get to Easter without Good Friday. And so we want to cover something with the gospel. We have to engage it with the gospel as well. It's a both and, not a either or.
Well, and Michael, to your point earlier, you talked about being willing to just sit with in the pain, right? Like, I know that's a situation where, and I see this so much right now, specifically in my Facebook newsfeed, of people who are just wanting to be like, yeah, this is terrible. There needs to be justice. He's been arrested. Let's move on from it. Now people need to stop looting. Like it's, and as soon as you do that, all you're doing is not sitting in the pain, right? So when we respond that way, we're just saying, hey, let's gloss over it. Let's dismiss it. We know it was a big deal, but come on, let's move on. And so we're essentially not sitting with you in it when we do that, right?
I think oh, go ahead, Pastor Pierre.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to your point, you can't properly celebrate until you lament. And I think, we get right to let's celebrate. They've been arrested. No, we're lamenting. And plus, there's so many more steps because we've seen this scenario before. So we're not even near where we need to be. But I want to piggyback real quick, and Mike, I'll let you jump into something that you said where I think a lot of times when we say we're not racist, and I hear that, and I know you're not, but then here's where I'll push it a little bit further. I don't think that's enough. I think saying I'm not racist, but also pushing back, speaking out against injustice. You see what I'm saying? So it's not like I'm not racist, and this is not your heart. I'm not racist. Yeah. Like, no. It's we're in this fight together. Like, we need you to use your platform, to speak out against it. So it's not. And I hear people say, well, I'm not racist. And then when, someone, if they said that to me, I don't see color, then it's, you don't see me.
Right.
That's my response. Then you don't see me, but it's taking another step. Like, I'm not racist, and we're going to speak out together against injustice. And so a lot of times from the black community, we hear from our Caucasian brothers about abortion, and we agree on that, that's pro-birth, but pro-life extends past the womb. And so that's a whole nother topic, but that's what we want to hear. The same way Roe versus Wade that we're yelling from the mountaintops. Let's use that same energy because that is pro-life. And then, some practical things for me, and I was talking to my pastor before we got on here, what we've already done is, and I think this will be a great step, for all churches. We were talking about this. A white and black church taking a resource, and Mike's kind of talked about some together. So what we're going to do is I have to get 3 pastors. He's going to get 3 pastors. So it's going to be, let's say, 3 white pastors, 3 black pastors, and we're going to read The Color of Compromise. And we're going to be on a Zoom call once a week. So we're going to be spending practically a year together. That's our goal. Slowly going through this book together, white and black people. So I don't think, and I understand about the slow progress, but in order for something to change, too, it's not just individuals. It's systematic. But I believe also education coming together collectively is where we need to go. So I think that's a good practical step. What church can you partner with, right, that's of a different ethnicity? Let's do a small group together. We're so focused sometimes on our church small groups. Well, there's a church down the street. Let's do a small group together, Tuesdays on Zoom, whatever it is. Let's go through a book together and let's dialogue. Or take an extended mission trip. That could be, we're going to send 4 people from our church to sit under minority leadership. I mean, that's huge. Because the reality is, if we really want to come to the table, then the power structure has to change.
Yes.
And when it comes to whether it's denominations, where it comes to people in power, if we're really trying to have multi-ethnic cultures, a lot of times our multi-ethnic churches, a lot of times we're still having monocultural churches. It's really, as a black person going to a church, it's assimilate to us. versus giving us an opportunity to be heard. And here's the next step, giving power, because that's the main thing right there. That lets me know if you're serious in terms of, are we willing to acquiesce our power for another person? And so I think those are some practical steps that I'm thinking through right now and trying to partner with another church, right? Doing a small group together, working on reconciliation. So I think that's a good practical step that we can take.
Yeah, man, we're definitely headed in the same direction. I would say, if you give someone a position without power, you just have a token, whether that's, in your life or in a structure. I would say is part of some of the questions you asked, like about those phrases or those things. I think part of it comes with proximity. And so what does it look like for you to be close to it? Because the reality is, I have some friends that have said some dumb things. I have said some dumb things. I am married. I have said plenty of dumb things. But the reality is, I know what I know because of the proximity to it. And so the challenge, the pushback is, do you live a segregated life? So when it comes to your top 5 friends, are they all monolithic? Are they all of one culture? Who's the preachers, the teachers, the theologians that you're studying? Are they all from one culture? Your mentors, does everyone that's pouring into you come from one voice? And so when we look at those things, sometimes you might have to intentionally, like what Pastor Ken is saying, pair up with someone else so that you can hear diverse voices. Because if we're supposed to usher heaven into earth, heaven is multi-ethnic, not just diverse, because we're not talking just numbers. We're talking multi-ethnic, where everyone is truly on an equal playing field. Every tongue matters. Every tribe matters. And so if we're going to do those things, we have to get close. And I know that's challenging, like being in Royal, Ohio.
Yeah.
So you might have to get out of the box. Maybe that means you fly in a minority pastor to preach. Maybe you partner with the next closest, whether they're 2 hours away, an hour away, church that's predominantly different from you, and figure out how you can do something together. Whether that's, I love the concept of 2 churches coming together and going on a mission trip together, regardless of like this issue. It just makes more sense to me, like kingdom wise, financially, everything, like pairing together kingdom collaborations. And so what does it look like for you to collaborate with a diverse church to come together is huge. And I think part of that is, Pastor Ken said, and I know this isn't like the standpoint you're coming from, but like some of us have to give up a part of our power to do that. And I think that is huge, because what it says is, I value you and your input, not and so I'm willing to hear you. And that just kind of goes back to the whole listen thing again.
Yeah, I think it's so what this pandemic has taught us, everyone's doing everything on Zoom right now, right? Yeah. Even if we don't have a church in close proximity, we can partner with another church and do a small group on Zoom, however you want to frame it, right? So I think that's great. We're in a season where it's really no excuse. But I think this is a good step. But the question I always have, even for myself in our church, it's, okay, what is the next step? And why does it always take bloodshed in order for us? It's like we say, right? It always takes somebody dying for us to have a family reunion. We should do this all the time, and we don't. Until somebody else dies and we comes together, right? But I think, like, practically, and I'm just sharing it with anybody out there, okay? Because we will lead the charge. Our church is willing to have a small group, whether it's on Zoom, to have these conversations. We can pick a book and a resource, and we can come together and lament and ask questions, no judgment, kind of like we're doing right now. One of the things I will say that I've had numerous conversations with people about, what can I do? And then typically I'll say, hey, man, you and I'm a busy person. You're a busy person. Let's read this resource together. Let's do this together. Let's have further conversations. And to be honest with you, it stops there.
Yeah.
And so for me, that becomes disheartening And now we have to guard against, for me, cynicism, in a sense, like, am I having conversations with people just to have a conversation? You got to guard against that. Yeah.
So listen, that's a really significant thing. This morning, I actually posted a video on our church's Facebook page. I went live and talked a little bit about some of this and reflected on Ken, you're in my conversation. And I talked about a little bit of kind of where my heart is for City North right now, what I feel like God's calling us into. And honestly, I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I know that it can't look like nothing, which is what it has looked like to this point, right? And so I talked a little bit about, Ken, what you and I talked about, like having some further conversations like this, that obviously I didn't expect to happen today, but I'm really grateful it has. But having some more of these kind of roundtables where we can just talk and we can be open and honest and real and vulnerable. I talked about, Ken, I talked about having you, I told my church that I'm having you down to preach this year. So hopefully COVID ends so I can have you down to
It's
preach.
not going to be because of my color, but I might empty out your church, man. So
No, because one of the things that you said to me yesterday that was so interesting, you talked about that power structure thing, and you talked about how it's pretty rare for a predominantly white church to have a black pastor come preach. And I thought about that, and I was like, yeah, man, that's true. And I mean, we certainly haven't. And that was never a decision that I made. Like, it was just what it was.
Yeah. And I try to be intentional behind that. So in our church, I say I do get a white pastor to come in. We do partner with other churches, as well. And kind of, I share this, on the line too. I've been asked by numerous churches to come be part of a panel discussion.
Yeah.
For reconciliation. And to be honest with you now, I'm pretty much declining that. And I've said to people, it doesn't have to be me. But for me, if you want to be serious and intentional about building a multi-ethnic church, have you had an African American or another minority come, get a microphone unfiltered, and you don't muzzle what they have to say? Yeah. Because if I'm going to be on a panel for 5 minutes just to be
a token,
go ahead and say it. Then I'm really not, interested, anymore. But one of the things I kind of talked about is, I just graduated seminary, but this is something I was thinking of, and now we're talking about, identity. And specifically in the African American context, you have so many black people leaving the church because we're looking for identity. We're creating the Imago Dei, which means we should get honor and dignity and respect for all people. And so, but I went my whole seminary, church history, not getting any black authors. We didn't talk about black history. And so even when we talk about, we're going to talk about black history of the Bible. Well, I don't even have to say black history because that's the Bible.
That's the Bible, yes.
Yeah, but all the images we portray, like right now, you look at something on TV on Netflix. Go ahead and look up the new Ruth. I mean, she's like Marilyn Monroe. I mean, so what I'm saying, I go through as a black person sitting in class for 3 years, don't get any resource, and then the church fathers that were reading were actually black. I had to look it up, but they were white images. And I'm like, do we have any contributions? And I'm a pastor of a church. And so there's people in our context, and they see what's going on, and they see the lack of empathy with Christians. So here's the thing. A lot of people in my church, and I just know this, they're not even mad at the world. They're mad at Christians.
Yeah.
because of the indifference, which speaks a lot when we're silent.
So this was the interesting thing. I had mentioned the video that we did. As I was doing that video, there was a guy that commented. I actually ended up doing 2 videos. My first one disappeared somewhere into the Facebook ether. On the first video, there was a guy that commented. I don't know him. I've never met him before. But he commented, and essentially what he said was, racism is around, like, we've just got to deal with it. There's not much we can do. And I saw it, like, in the comments pop up. And I, every now and then, I have a tendency to be a little more blunt than I ought to be. And I said, somebody just commented this. That's a load of garbage. I think I probably actually said that's a load of crap. And basically like that's not the gospel, man. Like, the gospel is hope. There is hope, period. Okay, so he does this. He came back a few minutes later, made another comment. I didn't read it at the time. But then after the video was over, I went in and looked at it real quick. And he was a black man who I don't know. And the second comment, he basically said, look, man, I've been fighting this so long. Like, I agree with what you're saying, but I've just kind of given up. And Ken, your point a few minutes ago about cynicism, I think this is one of the tensions right now that I want a little bit of guidance on how to handle. Like, what in the world do I say to someone who basically says, I've given up because I've fought this battle my whole life? Because the easy thing for me to say is, well, Jesus is the answer, but that's just a platitude at that point. That doesn't help, right? So what in the world do I say as a white pastor who has zero understanding of this man's experience when I encounter that cynicism that is, I'm beginning to learn, is obviously very, very prevalent in the Black Christian community?
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's that I don't know that person, but people that are in that state, when we are without hope, that's when we do reckless things. And so I think, speaking directly to that person, I would say one of the things that has was the most hope for me, which not to make this political, but politicians have a habit of going to Black churches and telling them that they hate racism. They need to go to white churches and tell them that they hate racism. But when I moved up here, and there's a pastor in particular that engaged, white pastor, that was very vocal on this topic of racial reconciliation, and from the pulpit, and he had no reason to. His church was I can name every minority in his church, So he had no reason to, other than the gospel. I think the more times that we see that is a return to hope. There might not be words in particular that you can say, but you can point him to, hey man, I know this is your experience, but why don't you help me? I want to listen. I want to learn. And then I don't want to just sit here with you, because this is what happens. Many that are like, okay, I realize this is an issue. They want to sit here with us and talk to us about it, but don't want to go talk to anyone else about it. And so it's like, hey man, I want to listen. I want to learn from you, and then help me go help someone else. I had an hour-long phone call the other day with a friend of mine who lives in Tennessee, and he's like, man, he's a white guy. I was like, I know if I say something, it's going to cause division in my family. So help me. Because what he felt was he was conflicted. He knows it's going to cause division, but he also felt like God was calling him to say something. So he was torn between what do I say that's true and honest, but not passive, where it's almost like I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
But also not disrespectful at the same time. And he was asking, is it his place? Is it my place as a white person to speak out? And I just affirmed him that it is. Yeah. This issue ought to be as important equally, because we're not talking about skin color. We're talking about that's a factor, but we're talking about people that bear the image of God.
Yeah.
And so that is unanimous across the board, should be as important to every single person on this planet, regardless of what the issue is that person is an image bearer of God. And so is going to be just being helped. Like, how can you help me change this narrative? Maybe I can't change your life, but if you and I can work together and we can change the next generation, like, I need your help, because I can't do it alone. Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to honor both of your time, and I can tell you right now, and I'm just looking at the comments, this was helpful. This was helpful for my soul. I trust it was helpful for yours. But I think these conversations need to continue. And I just want to give everybody just an opportunity, just some closing thoughts, how you're feeling right now. But I want to go on record and say this, and I don't know, because I don't know every church. I don't know what we kind of just shared as a practical step that we can take. And so, Andrew, I'm passing the ball to your court here, of two churches coming together, Black and white, and saying, let's do a small group, let's go through a resource together, and let's heal together. Let's listen together. It's not one-sided. I want to hear your thoughts from being a Caucasian church. I want to, and likewise. Yes. So I'm saying right now, our church is willing to do it. I'm asking, is City North willing to do it?
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I said in my video this morning is I addressed our church. I kind of closed the video by saying that the thing that I was the most excited about as I kind of talked about the fact that I felt like that God was kind of leading us into something new and wanting to be agents of somehow of racial reconciliation, even though I have no idea what that's going to look like. What I said is that the thing that was most exciting to me is that I know that our church is a church that will rally behind that. Ken, we're a very small church. We have been since we launched. But we are a church that genuinely really cares about people. I mean, really cares about people, brokenness. We've just never really framed that in terms of race because we haven't, I guess, been confronted with it enough to have to. So yeah, man, absolutely. I know that there are people in my church, the majority of them, who would be interested in something like that and would want to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, you can be a small church and make a big impact, and I think this will definitely make a huge impact. And it's definitely needed right now. So we'll go over the details. What I'm excited about is this is one of the things that Andrew brought to my attention because as we were having a conversation, he was like, man, let's get together and do some Zoom calls, do some things where we can flesh out these details. And so we were working on that. But then I called him up today. I was like, man, we gotta talk about it now. And so just our commitment is, and Michael, we're going to pull on you too, as we already shared that, is to continue the dialogue. And we'll talk, behind the scenes on what that looks like. Just hearing, again, just the conversation that we had. I'm looking at the comments too. I think it's necessary. So we'll work out those details. So if City North is watching, if Crossover is watching, if anybody's watching, all right, stay on us. We're going to work on the details about what that looks like. We're doing Zoom groups anyway. I think we can do like a book club, go through something together. And I think it will, man, I don't know of another church doing that. Other churches doing it. Michael, do you know? I don't know. And so this could be something that makes a huge impact, not only in our churches, but our communities. And this could be something going forward that can really bring some healing and some bridge building that we need in this season. I'll give you guys final thoughts. Michael, I'm going to throw to you. And then Andrew, if you want to, just share some final thoughts, and then we'll close out in prayer and we'll be done. If you have any question real quick, you can drop that in the comments. And that might spur us next time if we have another conversation as we theme it out, figure out which direction to go. Because I feel like we can be on here to midnight with kind of where we're going. But we have virtual church in the morning, and we're so excited about that. So, Michael, just final comments, man.
I think the two things that come to mind the most is we have to have honest conversation and honest dialogue. So what that means is I have to come to the conversation okay with a white brother or sister saying something reckless, right? Knowing that they're not doing it intentionally, but we can't grow unless we're safe together, right? And so I have to be able to come to the table with the ability to say something reckless. You have to come to the table with the ability to say something reckless, and we have to do that in love. Because that's the only way we're going to grow. Just like the statement, I don't see color. That edges on recklessness, but you wouldn't know that unless you say that in proximity, and then someone of color is like, hey man, like I wouldn't say this because of this and this. But that means people of color, like there's that we have to own a part of that, whether that means we bear some licks, but we have to be able to come to a conversation and allow people to say things from a good place, but the wrong way, and then love them through that process.
Yeah.
And my last thought is specifically to the church, white or black or diverse, whatever. With everything that's going on in the world, we need to be where the people are. So if the people are out protesting, if the people are out in the streets, then we need to be out in the streets. Whether that looks like prayer marches, we don't have another Dr. King that's leading those anymore. So maybe that it's our job to pick up that and lead. So me and a group of pastors nearby, we're actually planning that. We don't know what all that's going to look like, how that's going to look like. But we feel like if our job is to reach people for the gospel, we need to go where they are, because this is a gospel issue. So if the people are in the streets, then that's where the church should be.
Okay, great. And you have the date right now, right? You might not have all the details, but is there a specific date?
Yes, June 7th. June 7th is the date. We're looking closer to the evening, probably 1 or 2 o'clock. We're gonna have a moment where we're gonna come together. We're gonna pray. We're gonna hear a short word, maybe sing a song together, and then we're gonna march down the city street.
Okay, good. And once we get more details of that, we'll follow up and kind of talk more about that. Someone asked in terms of, we shared a lot of resources that we can go through. And that's something, Andrew and I would have to discuss because there's 50 books I could recommend that would be good to go through. What we're going to do is, and I've been thinking about this, we're going to create something on our website, some resources and some things that we talked about. So we'll follow back up tomorrow or the next day on this feed, and we'll drop a link to our website where we're going to have resources. One of the things about our church, I'm just huge on, resourcing people. And so we want to create a Rolodex for people to be able to say, go here. This is where you can have some questions and kind of what we're doing, this small group, hopefully it can create a template, as someone said, in terms of discussion questions. You never know what can happen, man. And so many times I was thinking about this as you were talking, Michael, we're waiting for someone, Martin Luther King, like for me, I'm like, where's the mega church pastors? But you know what? Sometimes you just have to do it. We're the ones having this conversation right now. You know what I mean? Martin Luther King wasn't Martin Luther King until he became Martin Luther King. You know what I mean? He was just some guy at the meeting and they picked him. He wasn't number one, but someone has to step up. And so that's why, Michael, I've just been loving what you're doing. But I mean, because that's what I was thinking. Where's everybody? You're thinking the name. Where's that? And sometimes we just have to get the ball rolling and not worry about, as we talked about small church, we can make a mega impact, And so, Andrew, is there any last closing remarks that you want to make?
Yeah, man. So, the word that I guess the word that initially comes to mind is just humility, and that's a loaded word when it comes to this, because there is first of all, there's such a lack of that in our world in general right now, and when I think about humility, I think immediately of Philippians 2 and Christ, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but instead made himself the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, was obedient to death, even death on a cross. And I've reflected on that passage so many times over it's one of my favorites in Scripture. I've reflected on that so much, and the man, there's weight in that if you really think about the implications of leaving the throne of heaven to come be a servant to humanity on earth. And so humility, I think, from a couple standpoints, one, from the white community, say to stop this garbage narrative of, because I'm not racist, like, come on, let's just move on, because it's garbage. I mean, it's just garbage. It's dismissive of the experience and the life of so many people who are good people and who are image bearers of Christ. And especially like white, black, whatever, as a Christian, I mean, that's bordering on sinfulness to be that dismissive of our brothers and sisters, right? And I say that as somebody who, like, that was the narrative I told myself for, a real long time. So the humility to say, I don't understand, and I don't even think there's anything wrong with the way I look at this, but even though I don't think there might be a problem with it, I'm going to enter into it. I'm going to have some conversations. I'm going to seek to learn and to understand instead of trying to make other people understand me. So there's humility on that front. But then also, obviously, as you guys have mentioned, like, there's also got to be some level of humility from the black community, because the majority of white people genuinely that I know, and look, there are terrible people out there on both sides of this, right? But the majority of white people that I know genuinely want to somehow help, but we're clueless. And so the humility and the grace to go, hey, I'm going to enter into this conversation understanding that these people are probably going to say some things that are tone deaf and that might even be hurtful and that might bring up really painful wounds from the past. But Michael, as you said, like, I'm going to enter into that and love them through it. Man, that's critical, because I can't progress in this if you guys aren't willing to be vulnerable enough to go, man, I'm going to talk to this guy who has no clue what he's talking about. And he might say some dumb things. And he might say some things that I want to come out of my mouth about, but I'm not going to do that, because then the second word that I keep thinking of is unity, right? And there's this idea that people are going to know we're Christians not by our theological stances on things. They're going to know we're Christians by the way we love each other. And if we can't do that, nothing else really matters.
That's good.
And it's easy to talk about that within a local church, a singular local church context. But it gets way more complicated when you start to talk about it across racial divides, across denominational divides, across those gaps. But if the church can't get that right, then we're just condemning the world itself to hell. And so, man, honestly, I'm honored to be a part of this with you guys. Genuinely, Ken, I thank you for giving me a chance to be a part of this and to be honest and to be vulnerable and to probably stick my foot in my mouth more times than I care to even know right now.
You just did it 3 times. That's it. Just 3 times.
Probably.
No, I'm joking.
And Michael, thank you for listening and for being honest with me and vulnerable. And again, who knows where this goes, but I think the world's just a better place when people can sit down and have real conversations and be themselves, and be humble and be honest with the goal of unity in Christ. So I know I'm better for this tonight, and I'm thankful for it.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm glad you were able to join us. Glad we were able to have it. I consider Pastor Ken like an older brother, and I look up to him a lot. So
I'm still a millennial, depending on what statistics you look at. So
how old are you, Ken?
Okay.
Huh? The feed's going out. The feed. I can't hear you, Andrew.
I just want to know which one of us is older. So
Okay, I'm under 40.
me too.
Me too.
Okay,
Me too.
that's all you need to know. I'm under 40. All right. According to Barner, I'm still a millennial. According to Barner.
Me too.
All right, great. Well, listen, man, I appreciate your humility, Andrew, Michael as well. This was a great dialogue. We were honest and open, but at the same time respectful. And if we're going to make progress, that's what needs to happen. And so, Andrew, would you mind closing us out in prayer? Because
Yeah, man, for sure.
we do believe in action, but number one thing we must do is pray.
Yeah, for sure. God, thank you for your love and your grace. Thank you for your mercy. God, thank you that you weren't content to stay distant from us, leaving a gap between us and you, but that you sent your son for us to close that gap. God, thank you that you have charged us with being agents of reconciliation and peace in this world. And as difficult a job and a task as that is so often, as overwhelming as it can feel, God, thank you that in our weakness you give us strength. God, in our powerlessness you give us power. And that there is no divide that you cannot conquer because you've already conquered the greatest one. And so, God, we ask that as for the three of us, as we've had this conversation, God, that you would spur us on together, whatever that looks like from here, in our individual contexts, but also together collectively, that we would begin to be agents of reconciliation somehow together in this world. God, for those who have been a part of this, whether live or watching this in the future, God, we ask that for each one of us that you would reveal to us through the power of your Holy Spirit our own prejudices, our own biases. God, that you would open our hearts in a powerful way, that we would not be content with where we are ever, but that we would understand that as image bearers of Christ, we always have more work to do. There is always more left to be done. There are always more rough edges to chip away. There is always more love that we can be open to. There are always gaps we can help close. And so, God, open our hearts. Help us to begin to see the people in our world not as other, but as brothers and as sisters, not as primarily fundamentally different, but as the same, just different in some ways. And God, help us to, in any way we possibly can, in our individual situations, in our individual lives, our circumstances, our churches, whatever those contexts are, God, help us to be sensitive to the people around us. Help us to not be dismissive. Help us to not be passive. But God, give us a righteous indignation for the things that should be that we should stand for. God, give us a passion to see your kingdom come on this earth here and now. Help us not to just wait for heaven one day, but God, help us to in every way we can to bring heaven to earth here. God, thank you for this. I thank you for my brothers who I've known for a few years and who I just met tonight. God, I thank you for them and for their honesty and their humility. God, I ask that you would bless their churches and their ministries, their families, their contexts. God, give us strength and courage to continue on and in all things bind us together in love for you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Everybody, we appreciate you tuning in tonight, and we're going to keep the conversation going. Hold us to it. Hope you enjoyed it. Share this video. I think it will be helpful for everybody. All right, everybody. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
I appreciate. I think, like, going back to, we have to be able to have honest conversation. I love, like, I feel like I've had some conversations like this week with some other white pastors from across the country. I'm like, man, I wish we had had that recorded, because what we try to do is we try to have this conversation and then we go into the pulpit to preach a message and we don't capture the fullness of the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's on either side. And so I think just people being able to see humans have a respectful conversation is novel nowadays, but especially on this topic.
Yeah.
Considering. Yeah.